Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
My guest is John Ellis. He is are you the head tech at Crafts, or?
I'm one of two head techs.
Okay.
So.
Okay. But your background is not all technical.
No.
Right? Like as I understand it, your background is actually first musical and then engineering and.
Well.
Give me a timeline.
You know what? They both happened at the same time.
Left and right brain together?
Pretty much. Yeah. So, in the beginning, when I was in the womb, I did say the beginning, my mom, she was listening to classical music, and studies have shown that the fetus can hear while it's in the womb,
right.
And classical music definitely plays a part in how your brain gets wired.
Right.
So when I was born, and anytime classical music was playing, I'd light up. And Beethoven was my favorite.
I was going to ask if there were any particular, Debussy or,
Beethoven was my favorite.
Okay, that's cool.
But I was also fascinated with gadgets, electronic things, mechanical things. My grandfather, he was an electronics engineer. So
you really had exposure to both sides.
Yes, because my mom's side of the family was the musical side. And my dad's side was engineering, because his brother... He was a math professor. He wrote calculus books for college.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And my dad was a surgeon, grandfather electronics engineer. So
you had the electronics and the mathematical part,
right,
which also merges well with music in that sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not as good as they are at math.
Oh, yeah. Most of us, most of us musicians are not. But I think we don't realize how good we are at math.
Right.
Because music is so mathematical,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So at an early age, I wanted to learn to play piano. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was like 4 years old, something like that. And I started taking piano lessons. But my grandfather, he lived in Indiana, and I used to go visit him. And in his basement, he had a workshop with all this test equipment and parts, and I'd go there and rummage through all that stuff, and he taught me how to solder and
playing with oscilloscopes and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he sent me one.
Okay.
He sent me one. He sent me some other equipment that he built for me, so I could test transistors and little power supplies, stuff like that.
You're doing like Heath kits and stuff like that. Oh yeah.
Heath kit oscilloscope and.
Yeah.
And so he would put together these little kits for me, and he'd mail it to me, and I'd follow the instructions, and I'd build it, and then I'd call him up and say, "Hey, I got it working."
And you wouldn't have to call up and say, "Grandpa, I got parts left over," right?
As a kid growing up, I was into a lot of things. So my schedule was just jam-packed, because not only was I into electronics, I was into music. I was, taking piano lessons, but I was also in theater. So I was doing musicals, and then I was in gymnastics, and I was also swimming. I used to race on a swim team. So it was I get up at 4 a.m., go train for 2 hours at the pool, and then I'd have school, and then I would have, because I was a nerd, well, I still am, science class, or the science club.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have theater, I'd have gymnastics, I'd have swimming, I'd have all of that stuff.
The team sports thing is interesting, though, because usually the typical nerd is also the loner.
Right, but I was a loner as a swimmer.
Sure.
Because I was
weren't you on a swim team?
I was on a swim team, but I was in a lane by myself.
Okay, because I was on a swim team too, and it was the same thing. It was you were competing, but there was no real camaraderie on the swim team.
Right, there
thing,
wasn't.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
And I was the youngest swimmer on the team.
So you were.
So they had me in a separate lane, but the coaches said I had the potential to go to the Olympics. As I got older and I got into high school, and at that time I didn't even want to swim anymore, because I got bullied a lot when I was little. The funny thing is, all those bullies now are way smaller than me. But I remember them seeing me swim because in gym class we were required to take swimming, and they saw me and they wanted me to join the team. And I said, no, I'm doing music. So.
Oh, okay. Good way to out yourself as a nerd right away. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, but in school, I got known as the evil genius because I was always bringing these contraptions in that I built.
Sweet.
And when I got to junior high, I didn't want to play music anymore. Like I quit piano, and
So you didn't want to, like, there were no rock and roll fantasies in that sense?
not yet. I wanted to ride motorcycles.
Okay.
So for 2 years I rode dirt bikes. But then, so this is, right around, the 80s starting, and I saw Eddie Van Halen, and I'm like, I think I might want to do that, and I thought that was super cool, but I was a piano player. So I was like, it's way cooler to be a guitar player, right? Or a lead guitar player. So I decided to quit riding motorcycles. I sold my motorcycles, and I remember seeing a guitar in my grandfather's basement. So I called him up about that, and he sent it to me along with an amp that he rebuilt.
Okay.
First thing I did when I got that guitar was I took it apart. And I had no idea what I was doing. And that was like a theme for me. Anytime, even when I was a kid, and I would find like a gadget or contraption or get a gift or something, the first thing I'd do is take it apart.
Of course.
Like one Christmas, my parents bought me a record player. I took it apart, and I couldn't put it back together. And they bought me another record player. I took that one apart, couldn't put it back together.
Oh,
Bought me a third record player, took that one apart, couldn't put it back together. They stopped buying me record players.
Yeah, I could see why.
Yeah. And then, I took apart the lawnmower and I destroyed it. But eventually I started to figure stuff out.
Uh-huh.
So when I got this guitar, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I saw Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstein guitar, and I was like, I want to build something like that.
So this guitar was not anything special in that sense, right?
No,
It wasn't like
I sanded it all down and just, bought a pickup and a bridge and strung it all up. And that was like the first guitar I started learning on.
Okay.
Electric guitar.
Right.
I had an acoustic that was my grandfather's.
But that's not cool.
It actually was. I still
Acoustic
have it.
guitars, well, but back then, I'm just
Yeah,
thinking
back
like,
then, yeah.
as a teenager,
Right, yeah.
acoustic guitar is not cool. You don't want to be a folky. You want to be a lead guitar player, right?
Right.
Uh-huh.
I also decided that I wanted to play keyboards, but not piano. I wanted to play rock keyboards.
Right.
So I was in junior high at the time. I was like at the end of junior high, and I decided I'll go to the local music store and I'll sign up for guitar lessons. And when I got there, I saw a guitar hanging on the wall, and I decided to buy that and just get a real guitar to learn on. And my teacher, his name was Michael Robin, and he had like a rehearsal space in the bottom of the music store where his band would rehearse. And I remember walking down the hallway there, and there's all these pictures on the wall of all these guitar players. And I point to this one guitar player, and I'm like, who's that? And he says, that's Yngwie Malmsteen. He's from Sweden.
Yep.
And it's very classical style playing, but it's rock. You should check it out. I think you're going to like it. And this was the Rising Force poster. And he says, but when you check it out, check out his lead singer, Jeff Scott Soto. So I checked out that record, and I was blown away because it was like, I loved classical, and here's rock and all of that stuff.
The two worlds, yeah.
And I was really inspired by that. And so what I liked about this teacher was that I was not learning textbook. I was learning it from the artist's perspective of listening, learning how to figure stuff out, how do you dial in tones in your amp,
and also learning how to improvise, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. And he had a 4-track recorder, and we used to record stuff.
Oh, okay.
And so that was really cool.
That was the beginning of the end there, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I was also into Rush, so I loved all the synth stuff.
Okay.
And he had a Prophet 5 synth. So I was like, I know how to play classical, but I don't know how to play any rock stuff. And he's like, well, I could teach you. And so my guitar lesson, which was originally a half hour, turned into 2-hour lessons because the first hour was going to be rock keyboards, the second hour guitar. And I got the gist of the whole keyboard thing pretty quick. So I just eventually just moved to 2 hours of guitar.
I was thinking to myself, I'm surprised you ever left.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you start really nerding out on all that stuff, man, that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and he used to come over to my house, like, when I get a few people together to jam, he'd come over and like help us out. So he was a really great teacher. Sadly, he got into a car accident and he was killed.
Oh.
And I was pretty upset for quite a while on that, because he wasn't just a teacher to me anymore, he was a friend.
Right.
One of the cool things that happened was when I was in class, learning from him, the keyboard stuff, I sold my motorcycles and I took that motorcycle money and said, I want a synth. And he went into Boston for me to the music store and he picked up a Roland GX3P, which I still have today. And that was my first synth. And so we would use that in class and record
Quite
it.
a good first synth, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So you really started getting into programming and stuff at that point too?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good one to do it with, because you can really get in deep with it.
Right. And I had the programmer for it. So that was cool.
Yeah, my first monophonic, well, first I had a monophonic synth. I had a Pro 1, but my second was a Juno 106. And that's the thing, when you've got the sliders, man, when you can really get in and dial in the parameters, that's when you can totally nerd out like that.
My first monophonic synth was the Radio Shack one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had that.
You mean the Moog one?
Yeah, the Moog one, which Radio Shack sold.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
MG1, I think it was called.
Something like that. Yeah, it was so cheesy.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Couldn't do much with it, but it was, at the time it was super cool because I could make all these cool sounds.
Right, exactly. Okay, so take me from there to how you, I mean, obviously you ended up in studio world somehow, right?
So what happened was, because I could play both instruments, and this was the 80s, the hair metal days, I wanted to be a lead guitar player, but everybody wanted me in their band because I could play both instruments, because they wanted the rhythm guitar player, keyboard player.
Right.
And I realized early on that I was better at rhythm and keys than I was at lead, so I decided, okay, I'm going to go that direction, and I get into the most popular band in town, and we're playing shows and stuff like that, and we're like playing Battle of the Bands, and we're winning.
This is Boston still, right?
Yeah, this is,
Okay.
yep. And so senior year in high school, we got a record deal. And, because we had written some originals. And so we had to go into the studio to record. And we went and toured a couple studios. One was in Normandy, it was called Normandy. It was in Rhode Island, and Warren, Rhode Island. They had an SSL console. So first time I ever saw one of those. And then we also toured Blue Jay, which was in Carlisle, and they were the most famous studio.
Yes.
Beautiful place. And we wound up choosing Normandy because one of our budget and also the scheduling. Like Blue Jay was so booked up we couldn't get in when we wanted to get in, so we wound up going to Normandy. And they were both great choices. And turns out that when I got there and I see all of these mics and all this outboard gear, and we're starting to record, and I put on my headphones because we're going to do a sound check, and we did a sound check to Ozzy's Shot in the Dark, right? I put on the headphones and I'm playing. I'm like, is he playing the record? Because I'd never heard us sound that good. And that headphone mix, I'll never forget, it sounded like the record. And I was just so blown away by this whole process that I was like, I think I might want to do this. I think I might want to engineer and be in a recording studio instead of just be in a band.
It's a real paradigm shift. I mean, I can so relate to that, because the first time my band went into a studio to do a demo, I remember standing in a vocal booth and talking into I think it was a U67 or something, but I remember sliding my hands into my pockets and being able to hear that, right? And I remember leaning into the mic and saying, man, I can hear the dates of the dimes in my pocket. It was like this.
Right.
There's something about that whole, the whole process, the whole signal chain and everything. It just really sucks you in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I decided that I wanted to go to Berklee College of Music.
So rock and roll dreams just completely over at that point?
No,
or?
not exactly.
Okay.
So I wanted to go to Berklee because the record contract was not life-changing. But I felt that if I go to Berklee, that will be life-changing, that I'm going to be able to, go way beyond being in a rock band.
Okay.
And it turns out that the other guitar player felt the same way, and he wanted to go to Berklee, and so did our drummer. So 3 of the 5 of us wanted to go to Berklee. So I auditioned, I got in, well, we all got in. Fall of '87 is on my way to Berklee.
So what did
We
this do to
failed
the
on this record
Yeah, I was going to
contract.
say. Okay.
They tried to sue us, but the singer's father was this huge lawyer, and he squashed the whole thing.
Okay.
So,
So you walked away from a record deal.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
impressive right there,
So-
And that was actually, I mean, obviously.
It was a smart move.
It was
is
a
what it was.
really smart move, absolutely. And your life could have gone in a completely different direction. But it's interesting that it doesn't sound like it was a conscious decision like, I know that the record deal is not going to be life-changing, but at the same time, it sounds like for whatever reason, you made the right choice, at the time.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I didn't realize how bad the deal was until I got to Berklee and went to music business class and then started learning about all this stuff. And it was like, good thing I walked away from
Well,
that
I dodged a
contract.
bullet, right?
Yeah. Right.
Uh-huh. Okay, so Berklee, what was your focus? Were you still...
Well, I wanted to be an engineer. So
Okay.
I was like, I want to get in the recording studios.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got there, you don't get to get into your major until your third year.
Your third
pretty
year,
much,
yes.
'cause, I was going for a bachelor degree. So I had all the other academics I had to go through. But, in high school, I got known as the guy who got things to sound good. Same thing happened at Berklee. Like, everybody wanted me to, be involved in the session. And one of my teachers, he gave me this piece of advice, and he said, while you're here, the most important thing that you can do is make as many friends and connections as possible.
Good
You
advice.
never know. When
Good
the person
advice.
sitting next to you is going to hook you up with your next best gig.
Yep.
So I followed that advice, and I made as many friends as I could, and I can tell you that I'm still friends with a lot of those people today, and we're still hooking each other up. Like one of my good friends, Steve Ferlazzo, he's the musical director and keyboard player for Avril Lavigne. Not to name drop, but name dropping is also part of your resume. So there are times and places where
Sure.
name dropping is needed.
But the bigger point, which I think you're making here, is the importance of, it's like we call it networking, but the point is really, you're going through these things and really just maintaining good relationships with
Right.
everyone you meet,
Because this industry
pays
is
off.
small.
It is. It is.
So, I get into the engineering program, and at first I didn't even get accepted, and I was shocked. I was like, but how can I not get accepted? I mean, I have this electronics background, I got all this stuff, and it's just because, it's a lottery to get into it.
Uh-huh.
So they started to change that, and Dave Moulton, who was the head of the engineering department, I met with him, and great guy, and he actually lived down the street from me. I didn't even know it.
Oh, cool.
But from where I was, and so we had a meeting, and he made some changes in the program, so it wasn't just strict lottery anymore. Now it was interview as well. So people who really wanted to be in the program that didn't win the lottery, aren't,
Right.
having to pick something they don't want to go into. So,
Mhm.
so in that class, or the engineering classes, we had to do projects, and I was working with a lot of really great musicians, and we're recording stuff like in our apartments, and I was thinking, if we all work together, we could get all of our stuff recorded in the Berklee studios for free. So I decided to put together a group, us where we would always work together on projects, because there are all these different majors. There's music synthesis, there's music production and engineering, there's the business stuff, there's songwriting, there's arranging, there's all of this.
Sure.
And for our project, somebody had to write the business contract. Somebody had to notate everything for the session players. We had to have ensemble players. We had to have a producer, we had to have an engineer, all of that stuff. So
Sure.
I figured, well, if I put all of my friends in these positions and we just keep rotating for when each person's project comes up, that means we're always working together on a project and we can record all of our stuff.
It also means that each of you takes a turn in a different seat on the bus.
Right.
Which is kind of cool too, because you get to really learn all the different stuff, the different aspects of that.
Right.
Which I think, that's really important when you start talking about that whole ecosystem. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how much goes into a project, and how many different roles in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were pretty prescient for a young whippersnapper at that point, I mean, that's kind of cool.
So Berkeley put out this CD of class projects, and I think it came out once a year or once a semester. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, it was a CD of class projects. Guess how many times we got on that CD?
Do tell.
Never once.
Really?
Never once did we get on it. And I remember when we're in there doing our sessions, and we had like the hottest players. And we had teachers coming in after hours checking out the stuff that we were doing because it was pretty killer. And we would sometimes even get extra time because nobody kicked us out of the studios. So our stuff, I thought, was pretty great. We don't get on the CD.
That's
and
frustrating.
I was just shocked. And so I finally found out why. And the reason why is our stuff sounded so much better than everyone else's, it was embarrassing. So they didn't put us on. And when I listened to the CD, I was like, oh yeah, that's nothing like what we were doing. So,
really?
Yeah. So I was okay with it at that point.
Okay. So take me from there to how you ended up here.
Okay. So at Berkeley, it was 4 years. I did not want to stay in Boston. I wanted to move to LA. And I wanted to get to LA as quick as I could. So I decided to go straight through. I went, over the summer as well.
Mm-hmm.
Summers were great in Boston because the weather was better.
Right, of course.
Half as many students in the summer program, which meant I had more time in the studios and with the teachers. And the semester was a little bit shorter, but still I had more time.
Yeah.
So I graduated in 1990. I actually had to go back for the ceremony because I was already done.
You were already in LA.
Yeah, and
okay.
I was lucky to have Phil Collins as the speaker, and he handed me my degree. So that was super cool. Yeah, I wanted to go to LA, and I was friends with this girl, Julie, and she was totally into rock music. She wanted to move to LA as well, and she wound up moving to LA. I went on to intern at Blue Jay.
Okay.
And when I went to go visit her, we go to the NAMM show. I'd never been to the NAMM show, but we managed to get passes, right?
Okay.
And we're hanging out at the Hilton after all of that stuff, and all the people are there partying. And she points, "That's Jeff Scott Soto." And I'm thinking, the singer, the guitar player that I saw on my guitar teacher's wall. And we're too afraid to go up and talk to him. But I wound up going to visit her a second time out there, and she's now dating him and living with him. And so I go to their apartment, and she introduces me to him. And he had just finished doing the Talisman Genesis record and played it for me. It wasn't even mastered yet. And I was blown away by this. And I asked him, can I get a copy of this? And he actually made a cassette copy right then and there for me. I was shocked that he did that before it was done. But I listened to that thing until the tape was worn out because I loved it. But we wound up hitting it off and becoming really good friends, and we started working together. So when I was at Blue Jay, I worked there for a year and a half, unpaid. But when I first got out of Berkeley, I get into Blue Jay and I think I know everything. I didn't know anything.
Of course.
Right? So I get in there, and the band that was recording was Tribe, and Gil Norton was producing them. And so my job there was to just sit in this little office, answer phone calls, and clean and run errands.
This is Blue Jay?
This was Blue Jay.
Okay.
Right? So that was my job as an intern.
That sounds anticlimactic.
Yeah, it was not anything special.
Uh-huh.
But I remember that they all go into the control room to go listen to a mix, and I say to myself, you know what? I'm going to put on a fresh pot of coffee. When everybody comes out, it's fresh coffee for everybody, right? The pot just finishes brewing, right? They all come out of the control room. There's a big line of them going to the kitchen, and they all start grabbing cups of coffee. Gil, last in line, gets up to the coffee pot, no coffee left.
Oh.
Looks at me, and he's like, just pissed, and he's like, the most important job you're ever going to have is to make coffee, and he's like ripping into me, and I was just like, whoa. I was like, how dare you speak to me like that? I mean, I just finished brewing this pot of coffee. Maybe you should have been at the front of the line instead of the end of the line.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say that to him, but that's what I was thinking in my head. And then I said to myself, you know what, this is actually my fault, because what I should have done is I should have counted how many people are here. How many cups of coffee can that coffee machine make? Maybe I need to get a carafe and brew 2 pots of coffee so everybody gets coffee. So like that was like the first thing that got me to like, you know, to humble myself.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I made a fresh pot of coffee and I brought it to him when it was ready. And, you know, after about a half an hour, everything was cool again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I applied that to everything that I did. Working on sessions. I learned the habits and the schedules of everybody that worked at the studio, anybody that came into the studio, and I was always one step ahead. So they never had to ask for anything. It was just already done. And that made a huge difference because now people started requesting me on sessions. And so no longer did I have to just clean the bathrooms. I got to now clean the studio and then get into, you know, being an assistant. And then eventually I'm opening and closing the studio and getting to work with, you know, some pretty cool
Once again, a little bit mature for your age in that sense, in that you understood early on that it's a service business.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is that there was a session coming in, and the name of the band was RTZ. Never heard of them. So I get in the control room, and there's this guy sitting there, and he had, you know, brown curly hair, and he was wearing flannel and a full-on beard. And I was like, "Who's this guy? He looks like a lumberjack." Because I'm thinking, you know, '80s, you know,
right.
metal stuff.
Right.
And I'm like, "Who's this bum?" And then I take another look at him. I'm like, "This guy looks really familiar." And then it dawns on me, that's Brad Delp from Boston. And I'm like saying to myself, how did I miss that? Because he was one of my favorite singers. And I think the reason why I missed it was I wasn't expecting to be working with him, right? So, and then I noticed, you know, that's Barry Goudreau, and Chris Lardalgi was the engineer.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, I knew about Chris back then. This was like 91 or something like that.
He was still a rising star at that point.
Yeah. So he comes into the studio and he was just super nice to me. I learned a lot during that session. And I remember setting up Brad's vocal mic. We used an AKG 414. He does the song in 2 takes. And it was flawless. So I remember, you know, at the end of the session, I'm in the back room and I'm boxing up the reels of tape. I think they were mixing it in LA. I'm boxing it up and Brad comes in and he's like, "Hey, I just want to come in and say thanks for all your hard work and everything." And I was just like, nobody ever comes in and thanks me. Nobody ever comes in and talks to me. And he sat down and he talked to me for like half an hour. And I was like, God, that's the nicest guy I've ever met. And I remember a few months later turning on the radio and hearing that song. And so that was like the first big thing I hear on the radio that I was involved in. And even though I didn't get credit on the record, which happens to lots of us, you know, it's cool to get a trophy, but the real trophy is experience.
Yes. Yes.
So, you know, I've worked on lots of stuff that
Sure.
no gold record, no nothing.
Sure.
But I loved the project, and that memory was actually
And you have the
more
memory
important,
and you have the experience.
right, than
Yeah.
some of the gold records, which is, I get it because I was in the room. I didn't do anything.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
So,
exactly.
but that was, that was just such a great experience when that happened. So, to get to your point, how did I get here? Well,
Well, you obviously went to LA first,
well,
right?
no. What happened was that after working at Blue Jay for a year and a half, I decided I don't want to work at a recording studio. I want to own a recording studio. So I wound up building a studio 15 minutes away from Blue Jay. I went and took out a loan. I bought an SSL, I bought the tape machine. I did all of that, hired an acoustician, and I built a studio.
So this was when you discovered your masochistic streak.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Uh-huh.
And in no time, I was like double and triple booked because I was getting all
Wow.
this rock work, and I was getting a lot of rap stuff from New York because they didn't want to pay New York prices.
Right.
And this was the old school rap, like, the stuff.
With the turntables and the crates of records and everything.
and real
Yeah.
musicians,
Yeah.
real drummers,
Yep.
real bass players. So, this was, in the days of Tupac and all
Sure.
that stuff.
Sure, yeah.
So that was super cool, getting to work on all of that stuff. And so then I started doing records with Jeff Scott Soto. If only my guitar teacher was alive today to know that this little kid that comes into his,
Yep.
classroom is working with the guy from the picture on the wall.
Yeah.
Which actually went even further than that, because a couple of years ago, Jeff called me up and he's like, hey, I wound up getting the 2-inch reels of tape from Rising Force. The record company didn't want it. They didn't know what to do with it. You think you could transfer it to from 2-inch to Pro Tools? I was like, sure. So I drove out to his place in LA after I'd moved here, picked up the reels of tape, and I transferred everything. So now I think, wow, this is all full circle. The little kid that walks into the class, sees the picture on the wall, actually
Love
has
it.
the master tapes
I love it.
to that.
And knows enough to basically archive them, baking
Yeah.
it and all that stuff. I mean, that's got to be a big project right there too.
Yeah,
you know?
it was a little bit of work.
Yeah, I bet.
And to organize it, there were no track sheets.
Yep.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
tape edits, there was stuff like that. So I had to fix a few things, but I got the whole thing transferred, and that was a great experience.
That's neat. Uh-huh.
So here I am doing my recording studio, and in the recording studio, I got all this outboard gear, and I was working with this one band, and the name of this band was Obsidian, and they had this rack of gear that they brought in, and one of the pieces was this Joe Meek SC2 compressor, this green thing, and on the front of it said Obsidian.
Yep.
So they bring that in, and they want to use it on the session, and so they
I remember those. Yeah.
So they run out of money, and they're like, hey, can we trade some of our gear for time? And I said, sure. So I took the Joe Meek as one of the items and stuff, gave him more studio time. Anyways, I'm doing another session with a friend of mine, and he was into rock music, but also like a gearhead. And so we started talking about gear, like things I liked and disliked about gear. And I was saying, well, I love the bus compressor in the console. I like the distressor. I like the 1176. And there's all these little things that I like, but gosh, I wish I had something all in one box that was just, exactly what I want. He's like, well, you're a tech guy, John, because like you built the studio, you maintain it, you have electronics background. Why don't you just build your own compressor? I was like, yeah, that would be a fun project. So I spent like a year just doing R&D, and I finally, building prototypes, and I get this compressor that sounds exactly how I want it to sound. I start using it on sessions. Other engineers and producers that came into my studio loved it. They were like, this thing sounds great. Can you build one for me? And I decided to start a company designing gear.
Because you didn't have enough to do running a studio,
Right.
clearly. Okay.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So I now have to come up with a name for my company and a name for this product. So the name from the product, I'm looking around and I see this Joe Meek SC2 that says Obsidian on the front of it. I'll just call it the Obsidian stereo compressor. So I trademarked that name, and now I've got to come up with a name for my company. So here's how the name for my company came to be. I was doing a session with Gary Sharon from Extreme, and he's doing Tribe of Judah. Exit Elvis, he wanted to have me mix the title track. And so he calls me up and he's like, hey, I'm doing this this record. I want you to mix it. Can you do it? And I was like, sure. When do you want me to do it? And he's like, right now. I was like, well, I can't do it right now. I'm actually in the studio with Jeff Scott Soto doing a record. I could do it as soon as I'm done. He's like, no. I have to get it done right now. And I look at Jeff, and Jeff is like, well, I could just pause and extend my stay if you don't mind me hanging out while you mix that. So I was like, okay. So Gary comes in, we start doing the Tribe of Judah stuff, and it's like 200 tracks. It was all done digital, right? And so my Pro Tools rig did not have that many outputs. So what I decided to do was to dump 23 tracks to tape, lock the tape machine to Pro Tools, and then that way I could use all the faders on the console, right? So I'm using 80 faders. My patch bay was spaghetti. This song was massive. There's a lot of submixing going on in Pro Tools. But, and this song is like 6 songs in one. It's like the way it morphs. And I wanted to approach this as one song rather than sections that I pieced together. So it was very complicated automation that I had to write to make this thing all work and transition perfectly. And so I'm sitting at the console and I'm like making some adjustments, and Gary's like, hey, can you make this thing sound a little more, and I meant to say dramatic or I meant to say drastic, and I said dramastic. And he starts laughing at me, and he starts calling me Johnny Dramastic. And so anytime he'd call me up or leave a message, he'd be like, hey, Johnny Dramastic. So when I was like, what do I name my company? And I'm like, I should just call it Dramastic Audio. Because like nobody, I mean, you can't give yourself a name like that, right? Somebody has to give it to you. So that's how that name came to be.
I love it.
So I get this product, right? I'm ready to, market it, right? And my friend who suggested I build it in the first place says, hey, why don't you take this to Fletcher at Mercenary Audio and have him check it out? So Fletcher, he was in Massachusetts as well.
Right.
Mansfield.
Sure.
So I call him up and I say, I got this thing, I want you to check it out. So I go down to Mercenary Audio and go into their control room. There's a bunch of people in there. And he hooks it up and starts A-Bing it to other compressors, and I'm saying to myself, he's not going to like it. He's going to rip me to shreds. So
he did have a reputation for that.
Yeah,
yes.
So he's playing around with it like that, and he's like, everybody leave the room except you. I'm like, all right, here we go. So I'm like, oh man, he's going to rip me to pieces. So he looks at me and he's like, you're my new best friend. I'm like, huh? It's like, this thing sounds amazing. I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah. And I was like, so he's like, what do you want to do with it? And I was like, well, I want to sell it. And I said, I booked NAMM. He's like, you booked NAMM? He's like, yeah, I'm going to exhibit it at NAMM. He's like,
you had already done this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had already booked NAMM, thinking I'm going to exhibit, because I've been attending NAMM for years as a visitor. I figured I'm going to go to NAMM and exhibit. And he looks at me and he's like, nobody knows who you are. Nobody's going to take you seriously. This is the music industry. The waters are deep and they are cold. But I think this thing sounds amazing. I'm going to help you. So he said, I'm going to put this up on our website. I'm going to hook you up with dealers, international dealers. I'm going to hook you up with dealers across the U.S. And he gave me a whole list of things to do, including cosmetic changes to it. And at first I look at it and I'm like, the thing's done. It's exactly how I want it. I'm not changing a thing. But then I bit my tongue and I said, he knows what he's doing. I mean, he helped launch the Distressor. He helped a lot of companies do it. So Fletcher also happened to be the guy that engineered our record back in 1986 that we bailed on.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
So he was hired by them to do that record. So I was like, he knows what he's doing.
Full circle here in a lot of ways.
Yes,
yeah.
There's a lot of them. So I finally wind up going to NAMM. After taking all of his advice, I followed all of it. And I get to NAMM first time exhibiting. I'm in Hall E, the dungeon, which
Yep.
is where all the
I know.
companies start off.
Yep.
And guess who my next door neighbor is?
Fletcher?
API.
Oh.
Couldn't ask for a better neighbor. The only
Paul
thing
Wolf?
that's separated, no, actually, Larry Droppa
Okay.
at the time, and Dan Zimbelman and Mark Seaman. They were the guys working the booth. And so the only thing that's separating our booth was this waist-height curtain. And
Right.
I'm thinking I couldn't ask for a better spot because all their traffic is my traffic.
Right.
So at NAMM, we wound up becoming friends. They really liked the product that I made, and the show was great. I got a lot of recognition because of that. And then API suggested, hey, why don't you build a 500 series version of this to fit in our 500 rack?
Nice.
And this is back in like 2005.
Uh-huh.
And so I then, 2 years later, come out with the world's first stereo bus compressor for the API 500 format.
Nice.
And the funny thing is that, every NAMM show we request to get a better space. And so they wound up moving to another space. And when I would request a space, I would get it the following year, and I would always get their hand-me-down.
Uh-huh. So eventually you made your way to Hall A.
To Hall A.
Yeah.
Eventually make it to Hall A, and I am up there exhibiting that. Plus, I then was showing a prototype of an SSL replacement computer. I want to design a replacement computer for my SSL that does the recall and the automation that runs on a Mac and an iPad. So I hired a bunch of people to help me write the software. There was a team of 4 of us, and I get this prototype and I bring it to NAMM. And I'm showing it, and like the forums were blowing up. Everybody wanted this thing. At the show, Jeff Harris, who's the head tech here, and Tony Nunez, one of our other teachers, were at the show, and they came to my booth and they saw that and they wanted it for the school. And Jeff says, hey, so you know the SSL pretty well. And I was like, yeah, I know it down to the component level. He's like, well, we've got a couple SSLs at Crast, and I'd never heard of Crast before. He's like, would you be willing to come out and tech out our consoles? And I was like, sure. So they flew me out, and I came and I teched out this room as well as the one over in Gilbert. And while I was here, they offered me a job. They asked, would you be willing to teach here and tech? And at first I'm like, I'm pretty planted in Boston right now. So no, I turned them down. But the scene in Boston was really just dying. And, I had just bought another place in Boston. I bought a 6,000 square foot church, which is where I tried to buy Blue Jay, actually. I heard it was going for sale. I called up Bob Lawson. I said, Bob, I heard Blue Jay's for sale. And he's like, it might be. I was like, well, I want to buy it. He's like, let me get back to you. And then he never calls me back, and he sells it to somebody in the Backstreet Boys and some other guy, and then the place shut down. So I buy a 6,000 square foot church instead to build my second studio. But this was right around 2008. The whole economy crashes, and I'm just like, I kept it going as long as I could, and when Crass offered me this job, and this was back like I think it was like 2017 is when they offered me the position, and I turned it down. And then I decided I can't stand Boston anymore. I got to go west. I was going to go to LA. I go to LA to look for a place to live. Didn't like it for living. I was like, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
I mean, I like LA, but not to live.
Right.
And then I thought about Arizona, and I was like, wow, it's a lot more affordable in Arizona. The weather, is
lots of
no
pluses.
rain.
Yeah.
And I figured, and if I go to work for the school, I don't even have to shut down my business. I could just go out to the school and start working, get my foot in the door, and then decide what I'm going to do. So I came out here for an interview, and I did a Pro Tools presentation for like 2 hours in front of Brock and Tony and Nancy and Dave LeBounty. And at the end of that, Brock was like, okay, we'll let you know in a couple weeks. I was like, okay. So I get back to my hotel room, and I get a phone call the next morning, and Brock's like, yeah, it was a no-brainer, you're hired. I was like, well, that was a quick 2 weeks. So I was like, okay. So I go back home, and I just pack everything up, and
shut down the studio and
shut
everything.
down everything. And I wind up renting, my place out. And then I move out here to a house, sight unseen. I saw it on the internet, and I was like, it's close to the school. I'll get my foot in the door, and I come out here, and I'm teaching, which was just phenomenal.
That's like full circle, really.
Yeah. And then after teaching here for a while, Chris Lord-Alge comes here to do a thing, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" Because our paths have crossed a few times in the industry, but we weren't like friends or anything. We just knew who each other was. So, but I was friendly with his brother Tom because he actually bought one of my obsidians. So anyways, Chris and I, we were sitting down having dinner after he did his thing here, and he's like, "You know what? I remember you from somewhere else, like a long time ago." And I was like, "RTZ, Blue Jay?" He's like, "That's where I remember you from." And right there, that like validated everything for me, because I was like, here's a guy that worked with me once, barely knows me, and he remembers me all the way back from 1991 from one session. So I must have done something right.
Yeah.
So now I wind up doing work for him. So he calls me up, and I go out to his studio to tech his console. And I get to his studio, right? And I'm staying at his studio, and I go to use the bathroom, and guess what poster is on the door? RTZ.
Of course.
Yeah. Like full circle, like
I love
again and again and again.
And now you're working on his console for Bob Clearmountain.
So what happened is that a year ago, Tom Lord-Alge calls me up, and he's like, "John, I bought this console from this studio in North Texas called, I think it was Split Window." He's like, "Would you be willing to come out, help me break it down and bring it back to my place and then set it up?" So I was like, "Sure." So he flew me out. We went, we got the console, 72 channel SSL. It was a Bluestone. There were only 5 of those were ever made. So it has a stereo 5 mod. They get rid of this here, the quad bus, and they make it a stereo 5. And then you can route it to just the last 8 routing up top.
Okay.
So the console is on the second floor, and the elevator is like the size of a bathroom, right? So you can't fit the console in that.
Right.
So obviously I had to split the console in half, unwire it, wrap all of the looms over to the other side,
Oh, jeez.
pull all the buckets out of it, and then we had to stand it up. And then we had to get like 6 people to carry it down 2 flights of stairs where you had to do a turn.
Oh, fun.
I mean, it was it was scary.
Good times.
But we get this thing on the truck, we get it back to Tom's, put it all back together, and then for the next year he would like send me like bits and pieces of it, and I would work on it. Then we hear that Bob's console burns down. And I'm thinking to myself, I have a spare SSL in my storage, I could loan that to him. Chris Lord-Alge had 2 spare SSLs, one which was big enough for Bob. Mine was too small for Bob. And then Tom has his SSL. So when Bob said that his console had these certain mods to it, can these mods be done? And originally he was going to use his Chris's spare. I'm saying Bob's is closer, like as far as the mods go.
Right.
Why don't we use Tom's console for this? So that's how it worked out, that now I'm flying back to Texas to wrap up that console and then bring it to my place and work on it.
And do all the mods,
and do all of the additional mods and fix all of the things, because nobody had really touched that thing in years. Like the previous studio never used it. So
so it's been in storage all that time.
Yeah, pretty much. And Tom had no idea what the condition of it was. So it was a great console, one of the cleanest I've ever seen, but it was just not loved. And it needed to be brought back. So I did that, and then I deliver it over to Bob, and I spent a week there setting it up. And so now they're finishing up the room. And, and I think to myself, I went from this kid to now getting to work with like the top engineers in the world, and you know,
Yeah.
putting their consoles together. As
Well-
well as taking care of all the studios.
Exactly.
Here at
I mean,
Crass.
you've got so many studios at both campuses.
And a lot of this stuff never would have happened had I not come to Crass.
Uh-huh.
Because, you know, I became a better engineer working here,
Mm-hmm.
even though I didn't go to school here. But, you know,
Yeah.
teaching here and all that, I'm learning from everybody
I was
else.
going to say, teaching in itself really
Yeah.
changes your perspective. I know actually that your students are waiting outside
Yeah,
right now,
yeah.
so I'm going to wrap with the question that I ask almost everybody, which in your case is really perfectly fitting because of this whole full circle thing. You're teaching kids now
Yeah.
in an environment, in an industry that has totally changed and everything. What do you tell 15-year-old you coming up now?
I pretty much tell them, which is what I tell my son, is what my teacher at Berkeley told me, is that same thing. Make as many friends and connections as possible. And also I say, there's no shortcut to any place worth going. Your timeline and the universe's timeline are two completely different things. I know that, you know, you have this idea of what you want to do in the future, but things don't always work out the way that you plan them. So, you know, sometimes you just have to listen to what the universe is telling you, right? It's because an opportunity might come your way and you're like, no, I don't really want to take that. That's not what I want to do. But you take it and you wind up meeting somebody that says, I know somebody that's looking for somebody like you. And then that's how you get that gig.
Yeah, serendipity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's pretty much what I tell students now. I mean, I can't teach somebody how to hear. I can teach somebody how to use a piece of gear, but really the way that you learn stuff is just by doing it.
Yeah.
You know, I can give you all the tools
Mm-hmm.
that you need that are going to help you along the way, but you know, unless you apply yourself and do all of that,
Yeah.
you know, you're not
And the
gonna get
people
very
skills and everything else, that's just learned by doing, basically.
far. Right.
Yeah, it's good advice.
Yeah.
John
Yeah.
Ellis, thank you for being my
Yeah.
guest.
Thank you very much for taking the time and talking to me.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.